Have you ever seen an image like this by Vermeer? Maybe you've seen The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Do you want to know more about the time period that they come from? These are examples of Dutch Baroque art. So let's go back to the 17th century, that's the 1600s, and talk about the Netherlands. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin Lecture Series. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin. Okay, so for a little historical context, parts of modern day Netherlands were under the control of the Spaniards. But there was a rebellion in the north against these Catholic overlords, these Spaniards, and they were kicked out. And the Netherlands actually gains independence in 1609. And it's really different from other countries in Europe at the time. It's kind of a true republic with no aristocracy at the time, a government that is ruled by merchants who are really developing a commercial economy, and the Netherlands really dominates the economy of Europe in the 17th century. And they became a really important maritime power, and the society in general was largely middle class. So without an aristocracy and without Catholicism, who could be the patrons of the arts in the Netherlands? So what we're going to see is a growing middle class art market in the Netherlands. The Dutch were Protestants, so they did away with all of that excessive guilt and drama and gold that you see in a Catholic church. So just think of Bernini's Baldacchino in the Vatican and Rome. And when we go to the Netherlands, we will see none of that. We will see churches that are really kind of stripped bare. And the idea for the Dutch at this time is that we don't need all of this extra stuff to help us communicate with gods. This was the Catholic Counter-Reformation position, was that art was a way for humans to connect with the divine. And for the Protestants in the Netherlands at the time, they thought, we don't need any of that. I have a direct relationship with God, and that's all I need. Calvinism really forbade the representation of God or Christ, so there's nearly no religious art produced in the Netherlands in the 17th century. There's also the absence of the aristocracy, and so we see really little to no mythological or classical subject matter. So what happens to the arts? We see the development of many new genres of arts in the Netherlands, including genre paintings like this depiction by Vermeer of a maidservant pouring some milk in the kitchen. Genre paintings are paintings of regular everyday people doing regular everyday things. What else do we see develop in terms of art in the Netherlands during the Baroque period? We will see the development of landscape painting, which we've also seen in the late Renaissance. I'm thinking of El Greco's landscape of Toledo or Giorgione in Venice in northern Italy. But we see further development of landscape paintings in the Netherlands during the Baroque period, and we see the development of still life painting. There was a great deal of optimism, hope, and a sense of nationalism at the time in the Netherlands, and these middle class people would purchase these landscape paintings and these still life paintings to decorate the interiors of their homes. And there was a lot of pride in home at this time in the Netherlands, and perhaps even today, this idea that the Netherlands is a relatively successful, well-off country where almost everyone is middle class. Anyway, this is the idea. We also see the development of group portraiture in the Netherlands during the 17th century. Because we've done away with the aristocracy, there's no need for portraits of kings and queens and princesses and dukes and duchesses. So instead, what we will see in Dutch art of the 17th century, and I'm thinking of Frans Hals or Rembrandt, we will start to see group portraiture where different individuals who are members of some kind of group, like a militia, we could think of the militia kind of being like, citizens, police, or maybe similar to a local police department. They're people that come together and keep an area safe, and they probably also fought during the war with Spain. These men would come together, pool their resources, pool their funds, and hire an artist to create a group portrait. So we don't see the royal portrait so much in the Netherlands in the Baroque period. Instead, we see these group portraits. So we see the development of these different genres of painting, including group portraiture, landscape painting, still life painting, and genre painting. All of these are popular in the Dutch Baroque. And we see an emphasis on Dutch subject matter, Dutch people, Dutch landscape, and this is really tied to this new Dutch nationalism at the time. Dutch Baroque is perhaps a bit more restrained and less dramatic than the Counter-Reformation art that we see in the Italian Baroque. The still life paintings that we see develop in the north of Europe at this time, we will also see this happening in Spain, which at the time is a Catholic country. So we might look to this really popular example by Juan Sanchez Cotan, Still Life with Game Fowl, where we see a great deal of attention paid to the details of what we might consider everyday objects in the home. In this context, some scholars talk about a sort of spiritual subtext to this still life painting, that perhaps these are sort of offerings to the Virgin Mary, and of course this idea that the Virgin Mary is the source of spiritual food for the faithful. And this is a big difference that we see between Spain and the Dutch Baroque. Remember that in Spain they're still practicing Catholics, so we have much more of this kind of Counter-Reformation art style in Spain compared to the Netherlands. We will see Diego Velázquez, who is a Spanish artist, creating genre paintings like our Dutch friend Vermeer. Diego Velázquez in The Water Carrier of Seville from 1619 depicts a young boy and a man in a kitchen. They are, pouring some water into a jug or a glass that they're going to bring in perhaps to some noble or someone of royal status. So we're really getting a behind the scenes, going in the kitchen. It's like looking at the downstairs of Downton Abbey and engaging with the working class. So we do see this from Diego Velázquez, who is a Spanish painter of the Baroque period. And this genre painting is something that really the Dutch are known for, and of course our friend Vermeer is known for this kind of painting. There's another great example from Velázquez, An Old Woman Frying Eggs from 1618, where we see this woman in the kitchen, and again this young boy, perhaps a servant, this water boy who's come into the kitchen, and we get this attention to detail. Here you can see the whites of the eggs really hardening in the pan that this woman is cooking in. So we really again get a behind the scenes look at the working class, regular everyday people doing regular everyday things. This is that genre painting that we see popularized during the Baroque period. Now in Spain, remember, they've remained Catholic, and we have a really strong cult of the Virgin Mary in Spain. So here we see Murillo's Immaculate Conception from 1678. Remember that Catholic doctrine maintains that from the time of her conception, Mary was free of original sin, and this image is very popular. We see depictions of Mary in a lot of Counter-Reformation art. This theme is really popular in Spain and Italy, and in Sevilla there is specifically a cult dedicated to the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. Images like this were also used to Christianize the peoples of the Americas as New Spain or Mexico was colonized by the Spaniards. So let's look at an example of a Dutch Baroque painting in this genre style. So here's Vermeer's Woman Weighing Pearls from 1664. So what we see is a woman, perhaps a pregnant woman, alone in a room, dressed in some fine clothing. You can see this fur-lined collar. So she's, sort of well off, and she appears to be holding a scale in balance, and you can see gold and pearls on the table. You can kind of see a jewelry box or something with a necklace or some jewels hanging out of it. So the idea here is that she's weighing these pearls. She's sort of counting her blessings and counting her wealth. Remember what the Protestants have just come out of and what they've been fighting against with the Catholic Church is, for example, the selling of indulgences. So the Dutch want to remind you that money doesn't matter when we're talking about the eternal life of the soul. And then behind her is a painting on the wall, perhaps a depiction of the Last Judgment, which is, a story from the book of the Apocalypse when Jesus returns to separate all of the souls, and all the good people get to go to heaven and all the evil souls go to hell for all eternity. So we can interpret this to be sort of a moralizing view of life. She's weighing this jewelry, but also in the same way, like Christ will weigh our souls in the end of time. And we as a viewer are meant to be sort of inspired to reflect on our own salvation and remember that jewels and pearls and gold and money, all of these things are emblematic of earthly values, and that money doesn't matter when you go to the eternal resting place. So the message here is to balance one's life, to temper one's wealth with virtuous behavior. And this is such a Dutch subject matter. This is so typical of the Dutch Baroque, because remember that we have this really growing middle class, this rejection of the aristocracy, and an embracing of direct relationships with the divine under Protestantism and Calvinism at the time. What else do we see developed in the Dutch Baroque? That's right, still life paintings. Still life paintings are pictorial depictions of inanimate objects, and these are things like flowers, vases, cutlery, dishes, and sometimes fruit and other food items, nuts, fish. Other food items might be laid out on a table. Sometimes you will see musical instruments, pieces of paper, butterflies, and even human skulls. Now, still life painting develops as a genre in the Netherlands, especially because of this middle class art market. And still life painting is considered in the traditional hierarchy of painting for art history. Still life painting exists well below history painting. History painting is seen as the pinnacle of painting because it requires the study of anatomy of the male form specifically, as well as history and mythology. And instead, still life painting only requires observation. And women really weren't allowed in the art academies at the time. Very few women got in. And even when they got in, they were not allowed to work in live figure drawing. They were not allowed to study anatomy or the nude form. So women were often relegated to painting still lifes. But women actually excelled in still lifes in the Dutch Baroque. And here you're looking at an image by Rachel Ruysch, but she also had a sister who was a painter, and there were many other female Baroque still life painters. So from Clara Peters, Rachel Ruysch, and Maria van Oosterwijk, among others. There were so many examples of women painters of still life at this time during the Dutch Baroque. Let's look at Clara Peters. She really specializes in still life painting, and she has an interest in depicting the different textures and the different surfaces. So look at the silver or pewter jug and the golden goblet and the ceramic dish and all of these different metals, the glass behind filled with the wine, all of these different materials, different textured surfaces, and this really extreme attention to detail. This is very typical of Northern European art in general, and we see this really tight composition, a really close-up view with the dark background that's very typical of the Baroque period. Now, the still life is kind of seen as a kind of more democratic kind of art form. You do not have to have a background in art theory or mythology or history to understand a still life painting. There's an interest with a still life painting in really replicating reality, replicating those details and all of the different textures. And artists really became experts in still life paintings because there was such a large middle class in the Netherlands at the time. Since they were sort of considered less important than history paintings and merely sort of copies of nature, they were ignored by art historians and theorists for years. But we have been able to rescue these from art historical oblivion in recent decades. Now, most of these still life paintings are depictions of the abundance of wealth in the Dutch Baroque period. The still life here reminds the people of the prosperity of the Dutch Republic. So look, for example, here we see wines and oils, we see lemons and other citrus fruits that have to be imported. Citrus fruits don't really grow up north in Europe. It's too cold. And so the idea that they're bringing these up from southern Italy, Sicily, into the north means that they have a great deal of wealth. In today's globalized world, when grapes aren't in season in California, we just get them from Chile. But back in the Renaissance, having these imported fruits was a really important signifier of wealth. We also see in these still life paintings depictions of flowers, and in some ways these might have served as permanent floral displays during the long, harsh, and kind of depressing northern winters. So you might have these paintings of flowers on your wall to remind you of the hope of spring, to keep something vibrant in your home. And they would also be a reminder of not only the wealth and the beauty that's around the Dutch people at this time, but also the fleeting nature of all of this wealth and beauty. So the idea is that everything in life, food, these citrus fruits, flowers wilt and die. Everything that is around us, all of this beauty will eventually die off and rot away. Such is the nature of life. Food rots, flowers wilt, people die. Remember, life is short, so live a moral life on the earthly plane so that you can live for all eternity in heaven. And this idea, this reminder of the impermanence of life, is often referred to in these paintings as vanitas. You might also see the term memento mori. Remember, memento mori means a reminder of death, and this idea of a vanitas theme or a memento mori is a reminder of life's transience. So let's look at an example here. Here we are looking at Maria van Oosterwijk's still life with a vanitas theme from 1668. So what do we see? First thing I want to point out is that you can see a little corn on the cob. Why am I pointing this out? Because corn is native to the Americas, and so we are here 150 years after the arrival of the Spaniards in the Americas, and you can see that they've brought corn back to Europe. And so this is showing us that the Dutch are kind of worldly and cosmopolitan, and they have these new world crops like corn, these exotic fruits and vegetables, shall we say. Beyond that, it's a rather complex setup. We have some flowers, we have a globe, we have a human skull, a book, some paper, an inkwell, and a pen. And we've got an hourglass. And if we look to the other side, we can also see a butterfly landing on these pages that are sort of flapping in the wind. We also see a glass jar filled with a red liquid, maybe some wine. Now, each of these components will have a symbolic meaning. So vanity is a minor sin, but it should still be avoided. So what are we going to see? We see an hourglass, for example. This is a reminder of the passage of time. We also see the skull. The skull is a reminder of death. But the wreath around the skull reminds us of the resurrection, that Jesus died, was resurrected, and through that, We're all gonna get saved. This is the idea. You'll see just in front of that skull a little butterfly. The butterfly is also a symbol of resurrection because, just like the caterpillar that sort of dies and then is reborn, we too will be reborn in the afterlife. We also see this book, these pages, the ink, the globe. These are all indicators of the wealth and the status of the artist or the client. So these are indicators of someone who is cosmopolitan and learned and knowledgeable about the world, and someone who is concerned with their eternal well-being of their soul. So even though this merely looks like some items on a table, it really talks about the spiritual life. It reminds us of the impermanence of the physical things of the earthly realm and reminds us of the fleeting nature of earthly life and the eternal nature of the afterlife. So hopefully this gave you a really good introduction to the Dutch Baroque. Let me know if you have any questions. Sound off in the comments. Let me know what you want to hear more of. And stay tuned for more Art Trippin lecture series.